So Emily, what's on your radar?
On January 3rd, 2019, around 7:30 p.m., Hunter Biden sent a text message to his 25-year-old daughter, Naomi. "I love all of you," he wrote, "but I don't receive any respect, and that's fine, I guess. Works for you, apparently. I hope you all can do what I did and pay for everything for this entire family for 30 years. It's really hard. But don't worry," Hunter continued. "Unlike Pop, I won't make you give me half your salary." We know this because the Daily Mail just published a screenshot of the message, which was reportedly recovered from Hunter's infamous laptop. The laptop, like his memoir, continues fleshing out a tragic picture of addiction and dysfunction. Importantly, however, the addiction and dysfunction are the public's problem too, given that Hunter was wrapped up in an influence peddling operation in which he traded on his father's name to carry out lucrative business deals. That makes the sad work of reading his personal correspondence crucial, given that his father is, the President of the United States. In this era of media corruption, there are two layers to nearly every story: the substance and then the coverage. They are often equally important. In this case, the media's decision to spend last week squeezing every drop out of Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg's indictment obviously contrasts with its disinterest, relatively, in the Hunter Biden saga, which, by the way, implicates the sitting president. Let's now set that layer aside, the media layer aside, to focus on the substance of the story. "Unlike Pop, I won't make you give me half your salary," Hunter wrote to his daughter. Miranda Devine synthesized information from a handful of the laptop emails in a 4th of July column for the New York Post. Quote, "There's no direct evidence of such a wealth transfer on Hunter's laptop," she wrote, "but what we do know is that while Joe was vice president, Hunter routinely paid at least some of his father's household expenses, including AT&T bills of around $190 a month. We know from an email on June 5, 2010, with the subject JRB bills to Hunter from Eric Sherwin, his business partner at Rosemont Seneca, that he was expected to foot hefty bills to Wilmington contractors for maintenance and upkeep of his father's palatial lakefront property," added Devine, noting Joe's initials are JRB for Joseph Robinette Biden. Hunter's complaint about his father's taking a chunk of his earnings might sound familiar. It's basically exactly what we learned from Tony Bobulinski shortly before the 2020 election, even if the media chose not to treat that information credibly. Here's more from Devine. "Further evidence that Joe expected to receive a slice of his son's income was provided by Tony Bobulinski, Hunter's former business partner in a firm called Oneida, which was set up to enter a joint venture with the Chinese energy conglomerate CEFC. Bobulinski says that Joe was the big guy, referred to in a 2017 email, who was to be allocated 10% equity in the firm. 10 held by H for the big guy." Okay, well, CEFC is a recurring character in the Biden drama. When the FBI caught Patrick Ho, an executive with CEFC, bribing African officials with cash in Chad and Uganda, he made a call. It was to James Biden, whose brother had just departed the vice presidency and was exploring a bid for the Oval Office. Why on earth would a corrupt Chinese business executive make an emergency call to James Biden? Well, according to Jim, Ho was actually trying to contact his nephew, Hunter. Here's how the New York Times reported on the exchange back in 2018. In a brief interview, James Biden said he had been surprised by Mr. Ho's call. He said he believed it had been meant for Hunter Biden, the former vice president's son. James Biden said he had passed on his nephew's contact information. "There's nothing else I have to say," James Biden told the Times. "I don't want to be dragged into this anymore." Part of the point of paying Hunter Biden money to oversee business dealings outside his areas of expertise is pretty much so that you can make a call just like the one Ho made back in 2017. So the new emails make it pretty clear that Hunter Biden's corrupt foreign influence peddling benefited the current president of the United States. This is all enormously difficult to keep track of, and perhaps that explains at least a tiny part of the media's disinterest. But we could go on for hours examining emails, texts, and public records outlining this pattern. Just last week, Fox News obtained a picture of Joe and Hunter Biden sporting wide smiles next to none other than Carlos Slim, the Mexican billionaire, along with Interjet CEO Miguel Alemán Magnani, company chairman Miguel Alemán Velasco, and Jeff Cooper, a former managing partner of Simmons Cooper and a Biden donor. Hunter set up meetings with Magnani and his father's transportation secretary during the Obama administration. When Hunter and Cooper were working on a deal with Magnani, they were both on a 2016 vice presidential trip on Air Force Two to Mexico. I really appreciate you letting me stay at your resort villa, but I have brought every single person you have ever asked me to bring to the effing White House and the Vice President's house and the inauguration, and then you go completely silent, Hunter emailed Magnani after takeoff on that trip. It's incredible. And again, we could go on for hours, but let's just dwell on one more recent release, this time involving emails that revealed longtime FBI Director Louis Freeh dropped $100,000 into a private trust for two of Joe Biden's grandkids in 2016, literally as he was seeking to pursue, quote, some very good and profitable matters with the former vice president. What? Seriously, what? Freeh's firm has had some questionable dealings, which makes the exchange all the more interesting, but $100,000? Explain that as anything other than a huge bribe. Trump corruption matters. Clinton corruption matters. Biden corruption matters. Now, of course, Biden corruption matters most because it involves the president right now, and in a healthy media ecosystem, that would be glaringly obvious. Of course, nobody asked Jen Psaki about the most recent emails in the briefing on Tuesday, but on the matter of substance, the drip of these emails is steadily exposing Joe Biden's proximity to and potential involvement with rampant corruption. It's possible none of this was even illegal, which, of course, is how they were making good money. It's plain as day in Hunter's text to Naomi. So how much of his dirty money was Joe Biden taking? Is that why he took Hunter to Mexico and China on Air Force Two, facilitating meetings that could lead to profits, that could lead to help from Hunter? The White House insists the father and son never discussed Hunter's business. That's hard to believe, it's farcical, but they're getting away with it. Corruption will always exist at the highest levels of our government, and probably any government. Influence peddling is wrong because it corrupts the motives of elected officials, which leads to corrupted results. It's wrong because it helps wealthy and powerful people leverage jobs funded by taxpayers to line their own pockets. At risk of sounding like a broken record, in a healthy country, our free press would be highlighting the Biden family as the very picture of elite corruption. They would be pushing relentlessly for answers to the questions these emails continue raising and answering, by the way. Instead, it's mostly crickets. Sunlight is only a useful disinfectant if people know to look. The limit of that metaphor is that disinfecting corruption from our politics involves people giving a damn. But if the legacy media doesn't care and is increasingly untethered from a business model that makes these outlets responsive to the broader public, nothing will change, and all the other versions of Hunter Biden will continue going about their dirty business, unbothered by potential exposure and the collective shrug it might induce. Let's talk about the collective shrug, because I think that is a huge reason why the drip of these emails kind of continues to we're just all shrugging. We're shrugging along with these email releases. But the newest ones, where you have Hunter Biden again insinuating that he's giving a big chunk of his salary to his father, and we know this is incontrovertible fact. We know that salary was at times based on corruption and corrupt influence peddling. So we know then that Joe Biden is benefiting from it because we see that bills are being paid, and we see emails showing that Hunter is expected to pay Joe Biden's bills. We have the Bobulinski claim, and then we have this text message. We have all of this right in front of us. How is this not a subject of bigger concern in the country, not just in the media, but in the country more broadly?
It's probably relative to the previous president, but you're right. Like, so we have these basic facts. We know that Hunter traveled on Air Force Two to China and set up business meetings there. Introduced a potential business partner to the vice president there. We know that he flew to Mexico on Air Force Two. We now have the photo of Joe Biden and Carlos Slim, one of the biggest oligarchs in Mexico. We know that Bobulinski met with Biden at that hotel bar. We have those. We don't have a photo of that meeting, but we have texts prior to the meeting talking about the meeting, and then we have text after the meeting saying it was great to have this meeting, and then we have that 10%, for the big guy.
Right.
We have Hunter Biden paying some of the bills, and if Hunter Biden saying half, that text message is shot through with all sorts of bitterness.
Yes, it is.
Good luck taking care of the family. It's so unfair to me, and this has been so hard. You hope you're not going to have to give half to me. And so I would bet because of all of that bitterness and anger that is behind that text message, I don't think you could take take it to the bank as a firm number.
Right. Yeah.
But the idea that he's paying like significant expenses for upkeep and maintaining the Wilmington home seems backed up by those emails. So you do have Vice President Biden helping Hunter Biden with business dealings by taking him on Air Force Two, where he's meeting people. The idea that they never talk business is not actually true. Biden has admitted, or Hunter Biden has admitted that they talked once at least about Burisma, so we know at least once, where he says that Joe Biden told him, "I hope you know what you're doing." So that's talking about it at least, but he says they didn't talk about it.
Well, also, you're telling me they're at the vice president's residence with Carlos Slim and a bunch of dudes that Hunter is doing business with, and this doesn't come up at all.
But that's the interesting thing. It doesn't have to.
Right. That's true. They
could just talk about soccer and talk about reality TV.
And it's still doing business without talking about the business.
Right, because they're not, like, when you're an oligarch like that, you're not actually the ones that are like doing the paperwork and doing the real work. What you're doing is making connections and building an empire. And so just the act of being in the vice president's mansion is the goal. What you talk about in there doesn't actually matter. You take that photo back to Mexico and you're like, look, I'm telling you, this deal I'm working on is legit. Here's the photo to prove it.
Right. No, absolutely. And it's where, if you're Patrick Ho, you feel a lot more comfortable engaging in business with Americans because you know that you can make that call to James Biden when the FBI comes with a subpoena. And yeah, I don't mean to say that the 50% would be like a literal number, but you're right. Yeah, the bitterness suggests that this is a pattern, that this is something that has been happening for a long time, and there's just the fact that Hunter this is the most amazing thing that I think continues to get glossed over, apart from the Patrick Ho call, which is amazing to me that the degree to which that gets glossed over. But the fact that Hunter Biden is on Air Force Two to China and then has business meetings in China. But the trip to Mexico is like incredible. He's on Air Force Two sending emails about like, thank you for letting me stay in your resort villa, but I have brought every effing person that you have asked me to the White House and the vice presidential mansion and nothing.
Right.
I mean, he's doing that from Air Force Two. Why is Hunter Biden on the trip to Mexico? How does he get invited to Mexico? Why does Joe Biden think he's on the plane with him? These are all like really obvious questions. If this were anybody else, obviously not to play the whataboutism game, but if this were anybody else, they would be big questions. But I think, to your earlier point about Trump, I do think that's partially true, that like the level of corruption that was in the sort of Trump organization, but also the Trump administration. I mean, there was few things were more frustrating than watching this like populist president who was giving hope to a whole lot of people who need it around the country, watching people in this city get rich off of that message and not give a damn about any of the people that elected Donald Trump or why they might have done that. It was incredible. But the reason Donald Trump was elected in part is because he was running against somebody as corrupt as Hillary Clinton. And the status quo, it was like, well, we can either have this corrupt businessman or we can have this corrupt longtime government person.
Yeah, I think it's two things. I think one is the scale.
Right.
You've got the president, and then you've got him owning a business just down the street where all of his cronies and foreign governments are pumping money into and saying publicly or privately in emails that come out, we need to stay at the Trump Hotel and we need to stay at this Trump Postal Office thing so that we can buy influence.
Right.
You've got Trump trying to bring major events to his properties so that he can profit from it. So the scale dwarfs it. And then I think there's a crying wolf aspect too, where the media is like, we spent 4 years covering your Benghazi hearings. We spent all this time covering your Fast and Furious stuff. We went down these rabbit holes with you, and we wound up with nothing. Now, I don't think that explains all of it. And I think there's some partisanship and some bias going on here too. But Republicans have to also own their inability to play the refs here by crying wolf on scandals going back to the 90s. Like these reporters, a lot of these reporters and editors were around in the 90s too. Spent years chasing Whitewater. Spent years chasing did Vince Foster commit suicide? All of these other scandals that were manufactured, and then you get to the end of that rainbow and there's nothing there. So now when they've got one where there does appear to be some influence peddling for in exchange for money, people are like, eh.
I mean, that's a hard explanation for me to buy, given that the media also has invented scandals when it comes to Republicans over and over again, just sort of like ad nauseum, taking, literally making mountains.
And that's where the bias part comes in. Yeah.
Right, you're right, though, this is something that Democrats and Republicans in Washington do. It's all part of the game. It's all part of it's 100% all part of the game. But it is crazy to me that you have, I think Trump was in part elected because people were like, listen, big business is corrupt, big government is corrupt. Let's go with the business guy. We haven't had one in before. So anyway, the Team Rising will join us next.
Looking forward to it.